Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is residential school survivor and warrior Geraldine Shingoose, known to many as Grandma Shingoose. Jerry attended Muscowequan Residential School in Saskatchewan from 1962 to 1971. For those in Winnipeg, Jerry is a staple at events and ceremonies and sought after for her knowledge and views on reconciliation. Jerry, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us this week.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me here today.
This past weekend, you were and other survivors of the 60 Scoop residential schools were honored and guests at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers game. Your first CFL game, from what I understand.
Yes.
How did that go for you?
I went to, well, first of all, I invited my granddaughter because she never been to a Winnipeg Blue Bomber game, and myself too, so it was our first time. But I was really impressed with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and how they, like even after September 30th, they were still, like, you know, acknowledging the residential school survivors and the 215+ children.
I saw an interview you did mention that, you know, it was an act of reconciliation. Can you talk about that?
Well, I seen it as a true act of reconciliation. Like those kind of actions are welcomed. However, like, but sometimes it acknowledges that they know the truth. Like, you know, and I seen it, like, you know, at the game, like I seen one of the football players kneeling in front of the sign, "Every Child Matters." And they are aware of that history, and that's what reconciliation means to me, is when somebody becomes knowledgeable and is aware of our history, then it means a lot to me as a survivor.
You know, more than 10,000 people obviously in the crowd, and maybe a couple 100,000 or so watching at home. What do you think that means to see something like this on TV?
Oh yeah, like even in the stadium that night, like every time they brought up the, like, you know, the Every Child Matter, or when Justice Murray Sinclair was up there, like, you know, that cheer was, there was cheers for us, like, you know, they were honoring us, and even the people at home that were watching it were able to see this, that Winnipeg was doing this for the survivors. It was beautiful.
We just had the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. How did you spend your day?
My day was filled that day. Of course, that week of Orange Shirt Week was filled. I was presenting to numerous schools and universities, but that Reconciliation Day was very, leading up to it was, I was looking forward to it because I wanted to see what Canada or even Winnipeg was going to do. So that morning I got up and I did a presentation to one of the schools, and these were immigrants that just came to Canada, and they wanted to know about the residential school experience. And then at 11 o'clock we had our healing walk. And we expected probably maybe 100 or so, but there's thousands that showed up. It was so comforting and beautiful to see all that support.
Yeah, you say a couple hundred were expected. I understand there were like 3 porta potties there, and about 10,000 people is a rough estimate that we've heard.
Yeah, it was. And then the survivors that came. There was just a few of us, but also we acknowledged the ones that couldn't be here, and, you know, and the families in the communities, because there's lots across Manitoba that surely wanted to be here, and we acknowledged them.
What was that like for you, as somebody expecting a couple hundred and to see thousands and thousands show up in support?
foresee. Okay, so I was at the beginning of the march, like, you know, the walk, and there was, like, you know, I could see people behind me, like, you know, seas of people, and I was going, leading them, and, like, you know, it was so strong, hearing the drum and hearing the people, like, you know, saying every child matters, and then I had to take a break because it was like, it's quite a distance, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to take a break, and I rested. During my rest, I seen people walking by me, all a sea of orange. It was so beautiful to see.
You had posted on Facebook that you'd been contacted as a survivor to potentially have a call from the Prime Minister that day. Did you receive that call?
Yeah. So on the eve before September 30th, I received a message from one of my friends, and she wanted to know if I could be put on a list as one of the survivors. So I provided my name and my phone number, and it was an urgent request from Justin Trudeau. So the next morning when I got up on the 30th, I confirmed if I was on that list, and I was on that list. So I was, during my presentation with those students, I told them, like, you know, don't mind, like, I might be getting a call, like, you know, from Justin Trudeau, and they said, sure, like, you know, like, take as much time as you want. And I waited all day for his call, and, like, you know, I even checked the phone, like, for missed calls, and there was no calls at all.
What would you have said to the Prime Minister if you had a chance to speak with him that day?
Well, I would have told him that, like, I'm a 9-year residential school survivor, and I attended Muscowequan Residential School, and that I experienced all forms of abuses in that residential school, and that also there were children that were found on the grounds of Muscowequan Residential School in June of 2018. And I wanted to request from him that he discontinue the charity status for the Catholic Church, because they need to be held accountable for all the 215 plus children that they found, and cutting their charity status is one step, like, you know, for Canada to do. And I was really discouraged that he didn't call, and I was even contacted the next day if he had called me, and I said no. So, but I had to tell my grandchildren that he didn't call me, so they were very taken back, like, you know, that he didn't call me. You know, it's unfortunate, and like, not to be, just to be discarded, eh? Like, you know, as a residential school survivor, he should never done that. Like, you know, to say he was going to call the survivors, and, like, you know, he didn't call.
As somebody, you know, expecting that call, knowing what you wanted to say to him, how did you feel then to find out that he was taking a vacation in Tofino at the time?
Oh yes, like, I was, the next day after September 30th, I heard news that he was on a vacation in BC, and I had thought that maybe he would be have a commemoration, a time of a reflection on that history of residential school in Ottawa as the Prime Minister of Canada, and he wasn't. There was no presence of him, you know, and it surely shows his privilege, but it also shows our history with Canada. Like, you know, Canada, they sent us to boarding school, like, you know, and they hid that secret, And it's almost like he's continuing to hide that secret by going and, like, you know, on a vacation on this most important day for all of us survivors. Like, you know, it was really disheartening, very disrespectful, and, like, you know, he showed no regard for our experience. But most of all, he showed no regard for those 215 children, plus, you know, all those children. Like, we found them in 2021. Like, what is he telling his children by doing that? Like, you know, his children, when they grow up, they're going to see this. Like, you know, he didn't acknowledge that day. You know, it's so degrading what he did to us.
Do you think his apology days later, you know, do you accept that apology days later that he felt bad, I guess, for going on vacation on the day?
No, I didn't accept his apology because, like, you know, I was so looking forward to his phone call. I was so looking forward to him, like, you know, as our leader in Canada, like, you know, to acknowledge that true history. And the world was watching, like, you know, and he wasn't there, he was absent. And his apology means nothing to me. Like, he showed his true colors that day, like, you know, about the residential school history.
Jerry, much more to talk about here. We've just got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with residential school survivor and warrior, Jerry Shingoos. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is residential school warrior Jerry Shingoos. And Jerry, you know, we've been talking about the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the very first one. What are your hopes for this day in the future?
Well, I hope that from this day forward that Canadians continue to share those stories, because it like every day, like I'm moving forward. Like, you know, it's very important that they continue to learn and become more aware and just research resources on the residential school experience, because it's not going to go away. Like, you know, there's communities that are still finding children on the residential school grounds, and it's a daily, everyday matter for us as survivors.
Yeah, going back to this past summer that we're referencing here, you know, there were hundreds of unmarked graves found in different communities. Not a complete shock to many Indigenous people. This was in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report that these unmarked graves out there existed, but you know, still difficult news. How did this news sit with you? So, on May 27th, the news came out about the 215 children, and that night I couldn't sleep. Like, you know, I shared with my family the news, but ever since May 27th to now, like, you know, I wake up every morning, like, you know, with that, because, or like, I'm feeling sorrow, I'm feeling hurt, and I'm feeling pain, like, you know, because, like, you know, those are children that I went to school with, and the other survivors went to school with, and, like, you know, that news certainly impacted us on survivors, but also it impacted on Canada and also worldwide. Like, you know, people became more aware, and, like, you know, it's out there, and it's no longer a secret, like, you know, because for hundreds of years those children were hidden and buried without, like, you know, the government of Canada even making any mention of it, or even the Roman Catholic Church. Like, you know, they hid that secret for all those years, and now it's out here in 2021. You and a couple other survivors, Viv and Chickadee, you took a trip to these sites this past summer, to Kamloops, to Cowessess. Can you tell us about that trip and what it meant for you?
Okay. In June, the first weekend in June, we had a sacred fire here. The youth had put on a sacred fire, and we took the ambers from the sacred fire, but also we took a sacred bundle. So I asked several survivors in Winnipeg to come on a journey to take the sacred bundle with me. And I'd asked Chickadee Richards and Vivian Catcham, and then other secondary survivors, like my daughter Billy Jo came with me, and my granddaughter Tiana, she came with me, and there was probably about 15 of us. We traveled in a caravan to Kamloops BC, and we presented that sacred bundle, acknowledging each item, because each item was very came from this territory, from Treaty 1 territory. We had a Treaty 1 flag, we had a Métis sash, we had medicines from our territory, we had even like baby moccasins, and one of the children colored a rock 215, and there was so many beautiful gifts in that bundle, and we presented them and shared a story on each of those items to the leadership, to Kamloops. And the chief and the councillors were very honored and blessed. They made time to meet with us, and they shared with us, the findings of the 215. And they're very, very busy, from 4:30 in the morning till midnight, or even past midnight, they're up, and working on this, and it's, they surely need that support. And by us taking that sacred bundle, I hope that it brought comfort to them from Treaty 1 territory, and we continue to offer our prayers to them, and I continue to bring voice for the 215 plus children, to help them, because it can't be forgotten. And
shortly after the findings into Kamloops were made public, you camped outside of a Catholic church just a few blocks from here. What are you hoping to get to hear from the Catholic Church? From
here, I'm hoping that there's continued support for the leadership of the Kamloops, even Cowessess First Nation. But also, we need to find out who those children were. We need to give them names. We need to acknowledge the communities where they came from. We need to acknowledge their families. But most of all, we need to find out who's responsible, for these children that were buried. There needs to be accountability and responsibility. I'm moving forward, I'm hoping that there's criminal charges against those individuals for hiding and burying those children for all those years.
Jerry, we've got more to talk about here, but we just got to step aside for another quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with residential school warrior Jerry Shingoos. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is residential school warrior Jerry Shingoos, known here in Winnipeg by many as Grandma Shingoose. And Jerry, you really are Winnipeg famous. You were even in a series called Winnipeg Famous. You're often called upon to speak at ceremonies, offer prayers. I read that it was Idle No More that had inspired you to speak up, to find your voice. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. In 2010, I was just coming out of a 10-year grief and loss, from my trauma from residential school, and losing my father, and I had put my sacred bundle away for all those years, and then when Idle No More came out, it was almost like I became awoke. It was, and just seeing the people seeing the youth rise, like it almost like it woke up my spirit, and then from there on, I just brought voice and, like, you know, to the wrongs on our Indigenous people, but also with the TRC coming to a close in 2015, I needed to go out and share my story. So I've been sharing my story probably with 11,000 students from kindergarten to university, and because I knew that that book was going to sit on a shelf, like that TRC findings, and so I needed to go out there and share. So I've been doing it for the last 6 years, and then in 2021, with 215 children found, more people are reaching out to us, survivors, so that we could share our stories and to bring that awareness, and then also to continue to bring that voice for those wrongs that were done on those little children that were found, those little ancestors. Yeah.
Well, we certainly have gratitude for you sharing that voice. That was the first time I ever met you myself. You shared your story with us at the closing of the TRC. You know, you have been carrying this burden for a number of years now, you know, speaking up. What advice do you have for the younger generation to carry this message forward?
The younger generation, my advice to them is to go to those ceremonies. Like, you know, our ancestors are waiting, and to seek out our relatives, like, you know, go to the ceremonies, go listen to the drums, go listen to the songs, and go listen to those grandmothers and those grandfathers, because we have a lot to share, and because we need to build the youth up to be strong and prepare them, because, like, you know, after this 215 plus children, there's more that's going to come, like, you know, and because I don't know if you're aware, Dennis, that I did a 2-day fast in Ottawa, and during that fast, like, you know, the ancestors, like, you know, gave me that message, was to show the youth, like, you know, those ceremonies, bring them back, but also our leadership. Like, you know, we need to support them too as well, because they're dealing with this every day, and I was uncomfortable with that, but like, you know, that's the messages I received, and it's the youth we need to empower them and make them strong and find their voice and find their true identity, who they are as Indigenous youth.
Well, Jerry, we thank you so much for all that you do and for being with us here this week on the show. That is all the time we have for this week. You can catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week.